Hi, Cubs, and we are going to continue, of course, our reading of the Phantom Tollbooth. But before we get started today, I want us to talk about or go over the question I asked you yesterday, which was, what do you feel like it mean that Norton Juster is trying to teach you when you hear this quote? What does it mean? I suppose there's a lot to see everywhere if only you keep your eyes open. So, I'm going to share some of your answers. Nishvita says, you can look at things better than usual. Diley says, if you open your eye, if you open your eyes, the better you see. Kamisha. Trinity says, open your eyes. Mason says, don't hurt your city. I think maybe that was his answer for last time. Srivatsa says, there's a lot more to see than you think, which I think is a good one. Tanish says, you have to see a lot of things. Sarvanch said, you should never think you saw everything because there's a lot that exists but is not visible. Caden says, there are many things beyond what you can see. Houston says, keep your eyes open and you won't miss anything. And I think that out of everybody's, when I read this, I have a feeling that's closest to me personally, because everybody can get something different from a book. But I think it's closer to, like, for me, is what Houston says, which is, for me, it's saying, pay attention to what's around you because you can miss a lot if you don't. So, mine is closest to Houston's, but again, people can get different things from books, and that's all right. So, let us continue. When we last ended, we left Chroma, the conductor of color, after Milo actually accidentally let a whole week pass with the symphony. By doing something that he shouldn't have. So we also left Alec Bings, who gave Milo a telescope that showed everything. There's much to noticing that escapes the eye. Through it, you can see remember, most important is all, you can see things as they really are, not as they seem to be. So it's a very special telescope so that he can see things as they really are and not as they seem to be, right? So we're going to continue from here, and we're going to finish the rest of the chapter. All right, here we go. Milo placed the telescope carefully in the glove compartment and reached up to shake Alec by the hand. Then he stepped on the starter and, with his head full of strange new thoughts, drove out the far end of the forest. The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them. Oops, I feel like this is another time that we can pause, that you can close your eyes and picture, make a movie in your mind from the words that Norton Juster paints, the word painting that Norton Juster paints. So, why don't you make a movie in your mind while Miss Canterbury reads this? The easy rolling countryside now stretched before them in a series of dips and rises that leaped up one side of each crest and slid gently down the other in a way that made stomachs laugh and faces frown. As they topped the brow of the highest hill, a deep valley appeared ahead. The road, finally making up its mind, plummeted down as if anxious to renew acquaintance with the sparkling blue stream that followed below. When they reached the floor of the valley, the wind grew stronger as it funneled through the rocks, and directed ahead, a brightly colored speck grew larger and larger, and directly ahead, a brightly colored speck grew larger and larger. It looks like a wagon, cried Milo excitedly. And this is like a wagon that would be on the back of a car or a truck kind of thing. It is a wagon. It is a wagon. A carnival wagon, seconded Tock. And that's exactly what it was. Parked at the side of the road, painted bright red and looking quite deserted. On one side, in enormous white letters, bordered in black, was the inscription, Cacophonous A Discord. And I want you to pause. Do you know either of what those words mean? discord, or cacophonous. So we know what means the opposite of, right? Discord. So what does a chord mean? Think back to music and think what a chord means. And we're going to continue going. And below, a slightly larger black letters bordered in white was Doctor of Dissonance. So as we read, I want you to think about what those words could mean as we learn more about this character. Because we know most of our characters, their names means two things. Their name, right? Here we go. Perhaps if someone's at home, he might tell us how far we have to go, said Milo, parking next to the wagon. He tiptoed timidly up the 3 wooden steps to the door and tapped lightly and leapt back in fright. For the moment he knocked, there was a terrible crash from inside the wagon that sounded as if a whole set of dishes had been dropped from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor. At the same time, the door flew open, and from the dark interior a hoarse voice inquired, Have you ever heard a whole set of dishes drop from the ceiling onto a hard stone floor? Milo, who had tumbled back off the steps, sat up quickly while Tock and the Humbug rushed from the car to see what had happened. Well, have you? Insisted the voice, which was so raspy that it made you want to clear your own throat. Not until just now, replied Milo, getting to his feet. Ha! I thought not, said the voice happily. Have you ever heard of an ant wearing fur slippers walk across a thick wool carpet? And before they could answer, he went on in his strange croaking way. Well, don't just stand there in the cold. Come in. It's lucky you happened by. None of you looks too well. So here are Milo and Tock and the Humbug, and they're entering, and here is the man. Look at that man. Ooh, here we go. Sorry, guys. The faint glow of the ceiling lamp dimly illuminated the wagon as they cautiously stepped inside. Tock first, eager to defend against all dangers. Milo next, frightened but curious, and the Humbug last, ready at any moment to run for his life. That's right. Now let's have a look at you, he said. Very bad. Very serious case. The dusty wagon was lined with shelves full of curious boxes and jars of all kind, found in an old apothecary shops. It's like old dentist, medicine shops. It looked as though it hadn't been swept out in years. Bits and pieces of equipment lay strewn all over the floor, and at the rear was a heavy wooden table covered with books, bottles, and bric-a-brac. Have you ever heard a blindfolded octopus unwrap a cellophane-covered bathtub? He inquired again, as the air was filled with loud crinkling snapping sound. Sitting at the table, busily making and measuring, was the man who had invited them in. He was wearing a long white coat with a stethoscope around his neck and a small round mirror attached to his forehead. Well, it sure doesn't look small to me. The only really noticeable things about him were his tiny mustache and his enormous ears, each of which was fully as large as his head. Are you a doctor? Are you a doctor? Asked Milo, trying to feel as well as possible. I don't blame him. I am cacophonous, a discord, Doctor of Dissonance, roared the man, as he spoke, several small explosions and a grinding crash were heard. You could tell, oh my goodness, here we go. My neighbors are going to dislike this part. What does the A stand for? Stammered the nervous Bug, too frightened to move. As loud as possible, bellowed the doctor, and 2 screeches and a bump accompanied his response. Now, step a little closer and stick out your tongues. Just as I suspected, he continued, opening a large dusty book and thumbing through the pages. You're suffering from a severe lack of noise. He began to jump around the wagon, snatching bottles from shelves until he had a large assortment in various colors and sizes collected at one end of the table. All were neatly labeled. Loud cries, soft cries, bangs, bongs, smashes, crashes, swishes, swooshes, snaps and crackles, whistles and gongs, squeaks, squawks, and miscellaneous uproar. After pouring a little of each into a glass beaker, he stirred the mixture thoroughly with a wooden spoon, watching intently as it smoked and steamed and bubbled and boiled and bubbled. "Be ready in just a moment," he explained, rubbing his hands. Milo had never seen such an unpleasant-looking medicine and wasn't at all anxious to try any. What kind of doctor are you?" he asked suspiciously. "Well, you might say I'm a specialist," said the doctor. "I specialize in noise, all kinds, from the loudest to the softest, from the slightly annoying to the terribly unpleasant. For instance, have you ever heard a square-wheeled steamroller ride over a street full of hard-boiled eggs?" he said, and as he did, all that can be heard were loud crunching sounds. But who would want all those terrible noises?" asked Milo, holding his ears. Everybody does, said the surprised doctor. "They're very popular today. Why, I'm kept so busy I can hardly fill orders for noise pills, racket lotion, clam salve, and hubbub tonic. That's all people seem to want these days." He stirred the beaker of liquid a few more times and then, as the steam cleared, continued. "Business wasn't always so good. A few years ago, everybody wanted pleasant sounds, except for a few orders during wars and earthquakes. Things were very bad. But then big cities were built, and there was a great need for honking horns, screeching trains, clanging bells, deafening shouts, piercing shrieks, gurgling drains, and all the rest of those wonderfully unpleasant sounds we use so much of today. Without them, people would be very unhappy. So I make sure they get as much as they want. Why, if you take a little of my medicine every day, you'll never have to hear a beautiful sound again. Here, try some." "If it's all the same to you, I'd rather not," said the humbug, backing away from the far corner of the wagon. "I don't want to be cured of beautiful sounds," insisted Milo. "Besides," growled Tock, who had decided that he didn't much like Dr. Discord, "there is no such illness as lack of noise." "Of course not," replied the doctor, pouring himself a small glass of liquid. "That's what makes it so difficult to cure. I only treat illnesses that don't exist. That way, if I can't cure them, there's no harm done. But one of the precautions of the trade, he concluded, and seeing that no one was about to take his medicine, he again reached toward the shelf, removed a dark amber bottle, dusted it carefully, and placed it on the table in front of him. "Very well. If you want to go through all of life suffering from noise deficiency, I'll give it all to the din for his lunch." And he said, and uncorked the bottle with a hollow-sounding pop. For a moment, everything was quiet as Milo, Tock, and the humbug looked intently at the bottle, wondering what Dr. Discord would do next. Then, very faintly at first, they heard a low rumbling that sounded miles away. It grew louder and louder and louder and closer and closer and closer until it became definitely ear-splitting roar that seemed to be coming from inside the tiny bottle. Then, from the bottle, a thick, bluish smog spiraled to the ceiling, spreading out and gradually assumed the shape of a thick bluish smog with hands, feet, bright yellow eyes, and a large frowning mouth. As soon as the smog had gotten completely out of the bottle, it grasped the beaker of liquid, tilted back what would have been its head if it really had one, and drank it all in 3 gulps. "Oh, that was good, master!" he bellowed, shaking the whole wagon. "I thought you'd never let me out. Terribly cramped in there." "This is my assistant, the awful Din," said Dr. Discord. "You must forgive his appearance, for he doesn't really have any. You see, he was an orphan whom I raised myself without the benefit of a governess or any other assistance for—" "No nurse is good nurse," interrupted the Din, doubling with laughter, if you can imagine a thick blue bluish smog doubling up with laughter. For I found him, continued the doctor, ignoring his outburst. Living alone, for I found him, continued the doctor, ignoring this outburst, living alone and unwanted in an abandoned soda bottle, without family or relatives. No niece is good niece, roared the den again. And there he is, with a laugh that sounded like several sirens going off at once, and he slapped where his knee should have been. And I brought him here. Oh, sorry, Miss Cameron's got to stop for water. Dr. Discord's voice is super raspy. And brought him here, continued the exasperated Discord, where, despite his lack of shape or features, I trained. No nose is good nose, thundered the din. Once again, as he collapsed in another fit of hysterics and clutched at his sides. I trained him as my assistant in the business of concocting and dispensing noises, finished the doctor, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. No noise is good. No noise is good noise, exclaimed the humbug happily, trying to catch the spirit of things. That's not funny at all, sobbed the den, who went to a corner and sulked. What is a den? Asked Milo when he had recovered from the shock of seeing him appear. You mean you've never met the awful den before? Said Dr. Discord in a surprised tone. Why, I thought everyone had. When you're playing in your room and making a great amount of noise, what do they tell you to stop? Well, that awful den, admitted Milo. When the neighbors are playing the radio too loud late at night, what do you wish they'd turn down? The awful den, answered Tock. When the street on your block is being repaired and the pneumatic drills are working all day, what does everyone complain of? Well, the dreadful row, volunteered the humbug brightly. The dreadful row, cried the anguished din. Why, it's my great-grandfather. He perished in the great silence epidemic of 1712. Milo felt so sorry for the unhappy din that he gave him his handkerchief, which was immediately covered in bluish, smoggy tears. Thank you, roared the din. That's very kind. I certainly can't understand why you don't like noise, he said. Why, I heard an explosion last week that was so lovely I cried for 2 days. The very thought of it upset him so much that he began to sob all over again in a way that sounded almost exactly like a handful of fingernails being scratched across a mile-long blackboard. He buried his head in the doctor's lap. He's very sensitive, isn't he? Asked Milo, trying to comfort the emotional den. It's true, agreed Dr. Discord. He's right. You know, for noise is the most valuable thing in the world. King Azaz says that words are, said Milo. Nonsense, roared the doctor roared. Why, when a baby wants food, how does he ask? He screams, answers the den, looking up happily. And when an automobile wants gas, it chokes, he shouted again, jumping for joy. And when a river wants water, what does it do? It creaks, bellowed the den as he collapsed in a fit of uncontrollable laughter. And what happens when a new day begins? It breaks, he gasped joyably from the floor. It breaks, he gasped joyably from the floor, and a look of utter bliss was covering his face. You see how simple it was? It is, the doctor said to Milo, who didn't see it all, and then, turning to the tear-stained, smiling den, he remarked, Isn't it time for you to go? Oh, no, isn't it time for you to go? Where to? Asked Milo. Perhaps we're going the same way. I think not, the den replied, picking up an armful of empty stacks from the table. For I'm going to my noise collection rounds. You see,
Once a day I travel throughout the kingdom and collect all the wonderfully horrible and beautifully unpleasant noises that have been made, pack them up into my sacks, and bring them back here for the good doctor to make his medicines from."
"And a good job he does," said Dr. Discord, pounding his fist on the table.
"So wherever the noise is, that's where you'll find me," said the Den, with an appreciative smile. "And I must hurry along, for I understand that today there's to be a screech, several loud crashes, and a bit of pandemonium."
"And in what direction are you going?" asked the doctor, mixing another brew. "To Digitopolis," replied Milo.
"How unfortunate," he said, as the Den shuffled towards the door. "How very unfortunate. Then you must pass through the Valley of Sound."
"Is that bad?" asked the perpetually worried Humbug. The Den paused in the doorway with a look of extreme horror on his almost featureless face, and the doctor shuddered in a way that sounded very much like a fast-moving freight train being derailed into a mountain of custard. "Well, you might ask. We will find out soon enough," was all he would say, and then he sadly bade them farewell, and the Den galloped off on his rounds. So that's the end of the chapter, and then next one we're going to come to is called The Silent Valley. So, my question for you is simple. Do you think that people love unpleasant noises, as Dr. Discord says? Remember, he says, thanks to cities, and we live in cities, that there's all kinds of unpleasant noises, like construction or people screaming or sirens and things like that. So do you think that Dr. Discord is right? Do people really love horrible noises? Or do you think that there is another explanation for it? Let me know in the comments, guys. And have a great weekend. If Miss Killeberg can find out